the three of us will be doing this semester.
Having it in my office or something.
Great. Yeah, I just made a list of goals for this semester.
Awesome.
Sure.
Okay.
That's good. I'm thinking probably the afternoon, but
Okay, yeah, that's fine. I think I'll be pretty flexible.
The Left Book Club was an organization started in 1936 devoted to publishing cheap books about left-wing, socialist, but sometimes just progressive ideas. And they were brand new books. It started with this guy, Victor Galanks. He was the publisher. And he had his own publishing house, Victor Galanks Limited. It's still around, but it's a subsidiary that does science fiction now. But in the 1930s, there was not really a market for left-wing books because booksellers, for the most part, boycotted them on political grounds. So Galanks, being a socialist and being a really savvy businessman, almost, ironically, he thought, well, I'll make my own market. And he did this through the book club model, which was subscription-based. And if you zoom in on this Please leaflet, this is how they increase membership. So you can get your hands on one of these left books, and then there'd be like 3 of those inside the book. Then you'd sign your name, put it in an envelope, and send it to his headquarters. Then they would put your name on a list, and they would send the list to your local bookseller. And then the next month, they released 1 new book a month at first. You'd say, hey, I'm Brian Christie, and I'm here for my left book. And they would have all the names of all the Left Book Club members in that local area. Then they would give you that book, say Red Star of China by Edgar Snow. And these were about 1/3 of the standard trade price. They would release 2 books simultaneously, but this one was a lot cheaper because you were a club member. And the general effect of this was they opened up previously erudite ideas that were accessible only by professors to like a middle-class audience. I mean, teachers were buying these, doctors, lawyers, just people who weren't really political before, but because of the Depression and because of what was happening in Italy and Germany at the time, were sort of forced to be interested in radical ideas. And this filled that need. Largely a middle-class white male audience, it was the 30s. However, they did do some socially progressive texts as well, such as Modern Marriage and Birth Control by Edward F. Griffith, The Black Man's Burden, John Berger. And some of the books were by well-known authors, some of them weren't. George Orwell, at the time, who wrote The Road to Wigan Pier, was not well-known. This was sort of his big break. It's about 44,000 copies of this were produced, and he became sort of a household name among the left-wing intellectuals. And this book's about it's an ethnography, it's been called, about coal miners in northern England. And the second half is an essay, which is my favorite half because it's actually about the Left Book Club, and he's very critical of it. He's critical of middle-class intellectuals for being snobby, out of touch with the working class, because as much as they tried, they never really got these to take off among working-class people. And he calls them, it's the same problems that are going on today, where it's still socialism is still an overly intellectualized thing. And at the time, people like Galanks, according to Orwell, were doing more work to alienate working people than to recruit them. I think in this book, he calls socialists vegetarians and smoothie sippers and shorts wearers, which at the time was like eccentric behavior. The other most famous book that the Left Book Club put out was Red Star of China. And this book is famous for introducing the world to Mao Zedong. No one had heard of him in the West until this journalist, Edgar Snow, I think he was American, went over to China and interviewed the guy, and it was a left book. So, both of these books have had amazing afterlives, but people don't know that the first edition was a Left Book Club edition. And then people would have discussion groups on these books. You get together with your local Left Book Club members. Maybe you'd have a presentation. Maybe the author would even come in and talk to you, and you would just discuss the month's reading. Some of these things hanging up, these are from the Tribune, which was a left-wing periodical, and there was a whole Left Book Club page for these. They'd advertise local meetings, pretty much advertising how big the book was how big the club was getting. They had summer schools.
Summer schools.
Yeah, they'd have summer schools where intellectuals would talk, politicians would speak about how to push the Labor Party leftward. They never formed their own socialist party, but they focused on trying to make the Labor Party more progressive. So these people would gather for like a week in the summer, and discuss the books, discuss how to mobilize, things like that. And eventually, at its peak in 1939, it got to 57,000 members, which was the biggest of its kind in the day. And there were a bunch of other competing political book clubs. This was by far the biggest.
When you say members, that means they all sign up on the list, subscribers.
Yeah, there were 57,000 subscribers at its peak.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that was huge at the time. If you look here, this is a comparison of a left book edition with the standard edition. And you can see how much cheaper the left book was to produce. Because for one thing, it's not a hardcover. There's no dust jacket. It's very minimal, 2 colors. And that's how Galanx was able to produce these and sell them so cheaply. And if you weren't a member of the club, you could buy that one. Most of the books were political, but not like this one wasn't. This was just because war was imminent. Protection of the public from aerial attack. It's the designer of the books.
Of the Left Book Club edition books?
Yep, Stanley Morrison. He also designed the famous Penguin paperbacks. And you can see the similarities.
In terms of the line
color.
spacing,
yeah,
colors?
The minimalism of it. The typeface takes a larger stage than the image, which was sort of a reversion back to 19th century bookmaking. He also invented Times New Roman. Right?
Awesome.
I know. Bow down to him. See that? It says liquidate the Left Book Club.
Mm-hmm.
In the late 30s, the Left Book Club was getting so big that the Labor Party felt threatened by them, and they made a rule briefly that said anyone who is a Left Book Club member cannot be a Labor Party member, because they thought the ideas were too radical. And so that's what this little satirical article is. Who were they? They were, I guess, comparable to the Democratic Party today. They didn't have a firm enough stance on Adolf Hitler. Was the main thing. They weren't tough enough on fascism. And a lot of the left books were about explaining fascism, how to fight it. And until Britain felt threatened, they really didn't have a hard stance on what to do about that situation. And of course, the Labor Party was afraid of communist influence, which was prevalent in the Left Book Club. A lot of Soviet sympathizers. Because people didn't really know about Stalin that much at the time. So people were still excited about what was happening in the Soviet Union. They held it up as a new civilization. And of course, there weren't any devout communists in the Labor Party at the time. And so that was what a lot of the ideological fighting was about. The editorial board didn't have any women. There were 3 main men who ran it with Galanx, but no women. There were women authors, however. A lot of the times they appear as co-authors with their husbands. So for the time it was progressive. I think we can look back now and criticize.
Any names you might, or books you might, off the top of your head?
Yeah, we can look over here at Soviet Communism, A New Civilization. So this is what I'm talking about, how the pro-Soviet stance was prevalent in the Left Book Club, and this is what Orwell criticized, this is what the Labor Party criticized. But Sidney and Patrice Webb, married couple, they founded the Fabian Society. But Patrice Webb was an educated woman. This is the Right Book Club, the reaction against the Left Book Club. It came out in 1937. And if you look on the inside, if we were to look on the inside or the outside flap, you'd see a name of the donors, and they're all sirs and ladies. They're all aristocrats.
What ladies?
Sirs and ladies, aristocrats, titled people, House of Lords. And so they were funding these more expensive books to counter the influence of the Left Book Club. And a lot of the ideological battles were fought not in the streets, but through these book clubs.
What's that? Syriza?
Yeah. So the Left Book Club is continuing today. It has no affiliation with Victor Galanx, It comes out of an English bookstore called, what is it called? Hausman's Bookshop, which is like a radical bookstore. They do anarchist pamphlets, but they've started a new left book club. And
So this is in Britain still.
yeah, it's in Britain, but they have distribution in the United States through the University of Chicago. And they read about current events, like Syriza, housing crisis. And you can sign up like the old days.
Oh, I wonder why they have Paul Robeson in this article.
Because he was a communist. And this is one of the big rallies that they would have. They would pack these huge halls, like 11,000 people would show up. And he would come to speak and sing. He would sing spirituals.
Yeah.
So you have some notable names, some MPs. And you could tell that they had an effect on politics, because in 1945, after the war, the Labour Party came into power, and there was like 8 or so people who had written for the Left Book Club who ended up in that Labour government in 1945, and that's when like the National Health Service was established, and sort of like the social welfare state in Britain became robust. And some people had traced it back to the influence that these books had in the culture. I would go through these books, and I would turn the pages of every single one, and every now and then I find a gem like that. A letter. This is just a guy who wants some radio parts, but it's cool to see the actual life of people who had these books. Some stamps were left over. The stamps are from 1937.
You just made history a little bit more real today. Yeah.
Yeah, right?
No, this is really cool. This is actually really cool.
I'm glad that you think so.
No, this is like rich, you know?
Mm-hmm. This is just a sampling of what we have in the archive.
So is this like a Left Book Club collection?
So, yeah, well, imagine you're a 28, 30-year-old young professional who's concerned about politics in the day. This is what your shelf might look like. Because every month you get a book. And at Alden, this is one of the largest collections of these in the world. Yeah, there's only 2 other libraries that have more expansive collections, but we have just acquired like 40 more volumes
Of Left Book Club.
of Left Book Club editions, and that puts us past Princeton as the biggest in the United States. So if anyone is at all interested in this, Ohio University would be the place to be. And we don't know how we got them, but they're here.
Fate.
Yeah, fate. Someone pieced them together bit by bit. We're pretty sure. It's a professor librarian sometime before 1990. People. So if you weren't as committed to the Left Book Club, you could be a B member or a C member, and instead of getting 1 book a month, they give you like 1 every other month or 4 a year, and they would make sure that the one they gave you was the one with the most popular appeal, because some of the books were more philosophical, denser, and other books were just written in colloquial language, very accessible.
And it wasn't about money, right? I mean, like,
yeah, they never made any profit off of it.
it was about the ideas really being spread.
Exactly, yeah. He wanted to spread the ideas. And he published books that weren't political that he would make money from. Like you said, this is a cultural artifact of the time, how information and ideas were spread. And instead of we would join a Facebook group today to express our political ideas, back then they would have had these orange volumes.
Oh, there's a coupon too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what you would send no money. The language is pretty funny. They say like, please, please suggest to your friend that he clip off one of these coupons and sign it and mail it to us directly.
Do they ever take ads in newspapers?
Yeah, it was very well advertised. And then they had their own periodical to go along with it called Left News.
Okay, was it like a zine or a magazine?
Yeah, it was like a newspaper.
Okay.
They would review their own books and then give news, political news, interpretations. We have those, but we just acquired them, so they're somewhere in catalog. I don't think they're back there yet.
Probably a lot of firing matches between criticism.
Yes, exactly.
Your point was this point, my point about this, and
There was a lot of that. There's a memorable one that Galanx wrote about George Orwell, kind of going after him for writing what he wrote. he distanced himself from Orwell, and there's no other author that they published that the publisher actually wrote an introduction to in the book, and then wrote about in their periodical, distancing himself from his views.
Which book was that?
The Road to Whig and Peter by George Orwell.
Were you at the screening of 1984 at the Athena?
No, I wanted to go. How was it?
It was very good. It was just really refreshing to know that, like, I think there was like 80 theaters out across the country to protest the current presidency.
Yeah, that's such a cool event.
Mm-hmm.
Alternative facts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the cool thing about Orwell is he was a democratic socialist, but his criticisms were not confined to the right. I mean, he saw plenty of fascistic tendencies in even the Left Book Club and groupthink, forcing his language into sort of the standard of the club, so as not to offend their readership. And he did not discriminate over who he thought was authoritarian. And sometimes he thought the Left Book Club was authoritarian. In the United States, though, you couldn't circulate these. It was illegal.
Like?
Yeah, you couldn't sell them in a store in the United States because of censorship laws. This was considered Soviet propaganda.
If you did, you'd probably be arrested or fined. Or
You'd be
both.
fined, yeah. They would probably take the book away from you. So if you wanted it, you had to have a British friend, and they would have to mail it over to you.
Again, that's another subplot for the TV show.
Yeah, right. I think it could be like one of those prestige, classy Netflix dramas, or like an AMC show.